How's everybody doing today? It's Wes here and chilling, and it's raining outside, and you might hear some thunder during this video, but you know what, it might add a little bit of atmosphere to it. This is an official video response to two awesome girls here on YouTube. I guess the idea originally came from Clair, or Clair, I believe is her channel, about sort of your introduction to horror. And then I actually watched a video response on that from my girl Heather, which would be Hella Girl. I can't remember the year, it might be 84. Heather, don't kill me if I get that wrong, but I'm going to put a link to both channels down in the information so you can go check them out and subscribe to them, because they are awesome YouTubers and they're awesome girls that have it here in the horror community. They really know their stuff, and they're just really cool personalities, and you know, they're great. They're really cool. So anyway, though, this is a video response about how I was sort of introduced to horror. Now, I guess everybody has different stories, you know, because everybody sort of grew up differently. My childhood was very conservative. My parents were very picky on what we were allowed to watch. You know, it was the whole, G and PG movies when we were younger, and nothing that was too violent or anything like that. So I pretty much grew up in the early 80s, up through the mid 80s. I guess I was, around 6, and up through 10, 11, 12. Anyway, those years for me, where I guess I was more impressionable, was when all these slashers and a lot of these horror movies were really out there. But obviously I wasn't allowed to watch them. I have a lot of memories, though, of going to the video stores like everyone else that was born in that time period back in the early 80s or early 70s or whatever, and seeing, of course, all the box art, all the big boxes with the scary artwork, and that stuff really intrigued me. I would walk over to that section, and I would look at the cover art, and it would freak me out. It would kind of scare me. It would make me very curious as to what was on those tapes. But of course, knowing then that I wasn't allowed to watch them, so it was a shame that at that point that I couldn't really, I wasn't allowed to watch them. It's probably a good thing that my parents didn't let me do that, though, because I'm sure I was very prone to nightmares and things like that, and I'm sure it probably would have really bothered me. So they knew what was best for me then, even though I was probably thinking, man, I'd love to see that. One of the first real memories I have of horror is when John Carpenter's Halloween was on network television, and I believe it must have been like early 80s. I was probably about 6 or 7 years old, and I remember it came on network television. I don't remember what station or anything, but my parents, oddly enough, wanted to watch it, and it's kind of strange because even now they don't really like horror movies too much, but for whatever reason, maybe they just saw a lot of ads on TV, maybe their friends told them about it, but they really wanted to watch, Halloween on television. But anyway, so I wasn't allowed to watch it, but my bedroom was down the hallway a little ways from the living room, and they had the door shut to the living room, and for some reason the TV was really turned up loud, and you guys know what that music sounds like. Just hearing that music and that theme music and everything, I could hear it in my bedroom, and it was just, I just kept hearing it over and over, and just that alone, I was sweating, I was scared, I was, imagining what they were seeing on this screen in there. And, just that alone really scared me. I guess also kind of intrigued me at the same time. But I remember being terrified just hearing that music and knowing that I couldn't walk in there and see what they were watching. But in my mind, I was probably formulating, what I thought they were seeing. I have a real vivid memory of that. And then the next thing that really comes to mind when I think about it is my family would take a trip to the beach, to Myrtle Beach, which is of course on the East Coast. My grandfather had a coworker that offered this house up. It was actually my grandfather's boss, and he offered this nice, like, it was probably about $1 million house back then, beach house, and he offered it up for everybody to stay in. And I was probably 7, 8, 9, 10. I mean, we went throughout all those years with everybody. But I had this one uncle that would bring this portable, VCR, one of the old kinds with the pop-up, mechanism and everything. And he would always bring these horror movies out, and he, plugged it up to the TV there, and all the adults would watch them. And a lot of times, being, kind of playing around the house and stuff, I would come in the living room and I would pick up bits and pieces of different scenes, or I might hear the music or something like that. And one of the first ones I remember is Firestarter. And you guys have seen Firestarter probably. But anyway, that movie was one of the first ones that I remember, especially first of all the opening credits with that Tangerine Dream music playing with the smoke, which I think is a really cool opening credit sequence. It's very subtle, but it really works well for that. I remember that music, and then the next thing I remember that really scared me was when they had that, they were doing those psychiatric experiments, they were injecting those drugs, and they showed that one guy that had like clawed his eyes out. I think I remember seeing that as a kid, and I think I must have walked in on that scene, and it really terrified me, back then. But that was also kind of an introduction. And then also another year at the beach house, I remember him bringing the Evil Dead, the original, and the opening sequence with obviously with moving through the swamp with the freaky sound effects and everything, and that really made an impression on me as well. But again, I was never really allowed to watch those, but they were being played out in a common room or in a common area, and even though I wasn't really in there, I would hear things, or I would walk through maybe and just see something. And as a kid, your imagination is so wild that you just see one little thing and you start formulating all this stuff. I also had friends that their parents would let them watch these horror movies, and then they would tell me about them. So I'd be out shooting basketball or something with some friends, and they'd be like, "Oh, I saw this movie called Friday the 13th, and this happened and that happened and stuff." And that kind of stuff started going into my brain and kind of scaring me as well, thinking about all those things. And like a lot of times at night, I'd be scared thinking about this stuff, even though I hadn't seen the films yet. But I can't really recall. I guess as I started to grow up and kind of come into middle school and things like that, I probably, when I would go over to friends' houses after school and stuff, sometimes they would probably have a tape of something. "Oh, here, take a look at this." And I think Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors, I remember that one pretty vividly, watching that at somebody's house. My parents probably didn't know I was watching it. But, as far as when I actually started, renting horror movies and really being able to just watch them on my own, I'm not really even sure. It was such a kind of a subtle transition for me, I guess, into that, like I say, it probably started mostly at friends' houses, probably like renting stuff like Friday 13th and all those different sequels. And I remember Poltergeist, actually, was probably one of the first films I remember watching with my parents, that them actually let us watch it. And it may have even been on network television too. And I remember it scared the crap out of me, especially the tree coming in the window, the clown, and all that stuff in Poltergeist that you guys know they're kind of cheesy now, I guess, when you think about it. But for a kid, that was very traumatic. And I remember that film really scared me. And that's one of the first ones I remember. Again, I say actually watching, with my parents and my sister and whatever. So I guess after that, it was more of just, when I became more independent and was able to, rent them and watch them on my own, and then go to friends' houses and "Oh, here, watch this one. Have you seen this film? Have you seen that film?" And I don't really recall the first one that I saw in the theater. I can't even remember the first horror film, because I didn't see a lot of horror films in the theater. I did obviously grow up in the 80s, like I mentioned, but I saw more things like The Goonies and Short Circuit and all those films, like a lot of comedy stuff. I didn't really see a lot of horror in the movie theater. Again, my parents, were really kind of strict on that, and they just didn't really want to expose us to that kind of thing. Honestly, though, that's about all that I can remember as far as my introduction, to the horror genre. Like I say, a lot of it, as a kid, I formulated so much in my head. I mean, I was, probably the horror movies I was living in my head at that time were probably way better or way scarier than the actual films would have been, had I been able to watch them. Because my imagination was just so wild that, I'd hear about one scene or one mask that some killer wore, or something that a friend would tell me, and it would haunt me just thinking about it, without even being able to see the film. So by the time I could actually see the film, I'd already worked myself up so much that it probably didn't even have as much of an effect on me as, I guess that's kind of short and sweet. I don't really want to ramble on here about it, but that was pretty much my introduction. Was being the whole sheltered kid. Oh, you can't watch this stuff, but then occasionally getting little snippets of maybe some music or maybe a scene here and there, or being exposed to something, kind of gradually, and then being scared. But then later on, kind of building up, not building up a tolerance, but kind of just working off of all that, finally being able to go out myself and rent it or watch it or in a theater or something like that. Anyway, though, I don't want to keep rambling. Claire and Heather are some cool girls on here. They're really awesome. Go check their channels out down below. I'm going to put the links for them. Subscribe to them because they need some more subscribers. It's always great to have people like that here in the horror community. It's a fun horror community here that we can talk about things like this and topics. I'd love to see some video responses for this. If you want to add them to my video or you want to go check out their video and link them to their video, whatever you want to do is fine, but everybody has a different story. I mean, some parents were obviously more liberal and they say, oh, you can watch this when you're 5 years old if you want to watch Friday the 13th or Halloween or whatever. And others obviously tried to shelter them more, like mine. But I did eventually, obviously watch them, and not only that, but I'm a huge horror fan now. It's my favorite genre. I mean, I've got posters everywhere. I mean, it's definitely my favorite genre, and the one that I've studied the most in film school and everything like that. And I've mentioned before all the reasons why I like it. But anyway, that's my response, and I want to thank you, you all, especially Claire, for such a cool topic. You guys keep them coming because these video responses and discussions are fun. Again, I welcome responses. Bring them on. And you guys have an awesome night, and I will be checking you all out on YouTube. Peace.